So I'm Glenn Phillips. I'm the executive director of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance. The Golden Gate Bird Alliance was founded in 1917 as the Audubon Association of the Pacific. And we are a bird conservation organization dedicated to protecting birds in the Bay Area and beyond. Our focus is primarily on Western Alameda, Contra Costa counties and San Francisco County, but we work all over the region. There are actually nine Audubon affiliated chapters in the Bay Area, and so there's an Audubon chapter in your backyard for sure, and I encourage you to connect with them. They're great organizations. Um, let's see, here we go. Next slide here. So today, this is my plan for today. I don't know what this is. I hope that's not showing up. Um, so I'm going to just sort of give you the basics of like what birds, why we should care about birds, what are they important for, why do they matter. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what birding is and how to do it. And I'm going to teach you some real basics of bird ID so that you are sort of prepared to start doing it. I'll talk a little bit about how to use binoculars and all the other tricks of the trade. We're going to talk briefly about some of the conservation threats that face birds and what we as home gardeners can do about that. Um, so as I said, if I feel like I've got the wrong um, um, message here, I will let you know. And it seems like this would be okay. We got a couple of folks from San Francisco, from San Mateo, Petaluma. So we're all over the place. That's great. I'm zooming in from Lafayette. So we've got the whole Bay Area. We need somebody from the South Bay. So all right, let's see. Let's move on. So why should we care about birds? I mean, they are beautiful and charismatic, right? That's often what draws them, that splash of color in your yard. You say, I can't tell you how many people have told me that they were never really interested in birds until they went someplace tropical. And nine times out of ten, it was a mott. When these are really brightly colored, beautiful birds, and they see a mott for the first time, and they're like, "What?" Try Googling mott. You'll see they're gorgeous birds, and that's often a hook. We call it a spark bird. That bird that gets you that triggers that suddenly like, oh, like I want to pay attention to this. Um, my personal spark bird is the American redstart. It's a small warbler, and they're found in the East Coast. And growing up, I had a copy of an Audubon, John James Audubon print of a um, American Redstart on my wall as a kid. And so when I was a young adult and living in New York, and I went out into the New York Botanical Garden on a beautiful spring day when there were migratory birds everywhere, and there it was. I was like, I didn't need a book because I had been staring at this bird since I was six. And there it was. I was like, oh, wait, like all right, that's what got me back into birding as a young adult. I started bird watching actually as a kid, but sort of dropped it in college and didn't pick it up again until that fateful morning when I saw my first American redstart. So look that bird up too. It's a gorgeous bird. Um, so yes, they're beautiful, but they also um, do a lot of important things in our environment. They are really, amazing at pest control. A single barn owl can eat something like 100,000 rodents in its lifetime. That's a lot of rodents. The birds eat huge numbers of insects, and in fact, most land birds, uh, for at least some part of their life, depend on insects for food. So there are some birds that are exclusively insect eaters, but things like sparrows that we think of as seed eaters, when they're feeding their young, they're not feeding their young seeds, they're feeding their young caterpillars and other insects. So So insects are really important. They're also primary scavengers. I mean, we think of turkey vultures as the obvious scavenger, but in fact, there are a lot of birds that are scavengers. Crows, jays, uh, even eagles, bald eagles are great scavengers. So there are a lot of birds that help remove other, the dead things from our environment. Um, they are pollinators like hummingbirds. They are seed dispersers. There's a California scrub jay in the on the bottom left with a acorn in its mouth. It's a really important service, and without them, seeds don't move, flowers don't get pollinated, and they're the one of the things that is sort of most important is that they are, we talk about the canary in the coal mine, right? That canaries were more susceptible to carbon monoxide poisoning than humans. So if your canary dies, you've got bad air and you need to get out. And they serve this purpose as indicators of environmental health in every environment. So when we start to see declines in, um, you know, peregrine falcons, as an example, when we started to see that decline, we knew there was something was wrong. Turns out it was DDT that was causing all the trouble. Um, so that's really important that we pay attention and know what's happening with the birds in our community. So if you are newish to birding, there are a lot of tools, but we often talk about birding as opposed to bird watching, right? And the reason that we tend to use the word birding these days is because the reality is that there's a lot of paying attention to birds that doesn't happen with your eyes. So listening for birds is a really important skill. And I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we use for birding. And one of them, you can see there's a little screenshot here of Merlin. Merlin is an amazing app that it's not perfect, but it is a great way to identify birds by sound and by picture. And it's a great tool if you're interested in learning more about bird songs and how to identify birds. It's a great practice tool. That's primarily how I use it, and it's been hugely beneficial to me. So we're going to be talking some basic bird ID here, right? There are about seven things that we really need to consider when we're trying to identify the bird. And I'm just going to briefly go through all of these and give you a sense of how you use these. So, one of the things that so I highly recommend. So I have on my phone here. I don't know if you can't really see that, but I have one, two, three, four, five. I have six bird apps on my phone, and a bunch of plant apps on there too. They're 'cause I like both things, um, but um, but Merlin is by one of the best. National Audubon has an Audubon app for birds. I also really like the Sibley app. It's more expensive. You actually have to pay for it, but it's totally worth it. And instead of carrying a field guide that's like that, you've got your phone with you anyway, and it's got everything you need on it. So super useful tool. All right, so we'll start with size. The first of all, size. We say it's relative, but really what I mean by that is that it's really it's hard to distinguish size when you're looking at a bird at a distance because, right, if we think about how perspective works, the farther away, the smaller it looks. Right. So if we're looking at a crow that's close, it's going to seem really big. A crow really far away is going to seem small. And so if you sometimes you really can't judge that size just by looking at an individual bird, and you need a benchmark, a reference point to understand the size. And so we often will use these four birds that are here. So a sparrow, so is it bigger or smaller than a sparrow? Is it bigger or smaller than a robin? Is it bigger or smaller than a crow? And then is it bigger or smaller than a goose? And that's a good way to talk about the size of a bird. So if I'm looking, for a varied thrush, which is one of my favorite birds, it's a little bit smaller than a robin. So that's sort of a good. So if the bird I'm looking at is bigger than a robin, probably not. If it's much smaller, also probably not. So those are clues. Here at the bottom, we have two different. If I can move this up a little bit so I can see what you're seeing better. Oop. We have two woodpeckers. All right, and you'll notice they look very similar. One of them has that little red on it, the other one doesn't, but they both have a similar pattern. And so the difference between these two birds, one of which is a downy woodpecker and the other is a hairy woodpecker, one of the things we look at in this case, we're looking at the bill size, right? So you see the one on the right, the downy woodpecker has a tiny little bill compared to its head, whereas the one on the left, the hairy woodpecker, it has a much more substantial bill. So it's not just the actual size. Technically, hairy woodpeckers are bigger than downy woodpeckers. However, one of the things that happens with many birds is that their size is not just it's not just about the individual bird, it's also about whether it's male or female. Female birds are often bigger than male birds. Not always. Sometimes it's the other way around, but generally speaking, the females are larger than the males. And so a female hairy which is bigger than or excuse me, a male hairy is about the size of a female downy, is what I'm trying to get at here. So there's some overlap in sizes, and that's often gendered. So keep an eye out for that. In general, the birds that are most distinct in terms of size differences are the raptors. So if you're looking at a hawk and you see one's bigger than the other, the bigger one is the female. Right? They're bigger because they are as egg layers. They have to be able to handle the mass of all those eggs that they're carrying and still be able to fly. So it helps to be just a little bigger to be able to carry the extra load of eggs when you're in the nesting season. Its shape is another critical factor in identifying birds. And I was out birding yesterday with a group from my garden club, and there was an Anna's hummingbird perched on the top of a tree, and it was far away. And I knew it was an Anna's hummingbird because of its shape. Anna's have a very distinctive shape that's different from other hummingbirds in this area. So I knew it wasn't an Allen's or a Rufus or a Calliope or any of the other hummingbirds we might see because it had Anna's shape. Um, and here are four birds that I bet you can all identify just by their shape, right? Nobody has trouble distinguishing these four. Um, so the flamingo, a very distinctive shape, pelican, penguin, toucan, right? These are all really distinctive birds. We look at them and can pick them out without even if you're not a birder, I'm sure you can identify these four birds. Um, and uh, and so what you're looking at are clues like the shape of the body. Is it more a vertical bird or a horizontal bird? Is it big and fat or is it skinny? Is it all those things play into your understanding of the bird. Bill shape, right? These four have really distinctive bill shapes. The length and color and patterns of the tail, wing shape, and then also posture. Right? Some birds sit up more. Some birds are more recliny, and those postures can be really like when you really get to know a bird, you can identify it without even thinking about it because it just makes what we call the general impression, size, and shape. Right? It's like you just see it. Um, so bills are also a really great tool for identifying birds. And that's just that we looked at the downy and the hairy that had very slight, subtle differences in their bills. Right here are some birds that have very distinct differences. So in the top, that's a Western grebe with that sh kind of sharp spearing. This is a fish-eating bird, so it's kind of like a harpoon. The grosbeak, big beak. That's what grosbeak means, with a really big beak, but big chonky seed and fruit eater. We have a little sparrowbill. The on the left, the dark bird is a black phoebe, and its bill is specialized for catching insects. So it's kind of tweezer-like and small, but definitely noticed at the base and above the bill are these little extra feathers. They're called phyloplumes, and those are actually like whiskers on a cat, right? They're super sensitive to air pressure and movement changes and air movement, and so they can actually sense the location of the bird. I mean, of the insect prey. Interestingly, this curlew bill. I remember, is it a whimbrel? I can't see enough of the bird to tell what it is. Um, I think it's a curlew. Um, the curlew bill is down curved. Also very sensitive, and it can actually detect movement of prey deep in the mud. And this is like a 6-inch long bill, so it's going way deep in the mud. Um, Now, probably sometime during your schooling career, you learned about Darwin's finches of the Galapagos. And one of what's the big story with Darwin's finches is that they this is a basically descendants from a single species have diversified into a variety of species on all of these isolated islands. And when you look at them, they have completely different bills, depending on their diet. And they've specialized so that they're not overlapping their niches. That's what we call a sort of the set of stuff that a bird can have, that what it needs to survive. And so I would sort of caution that one of the things we learned from Darwin is that these birds can evolve very different bill shapes depending on their diet. And so one of the things that scientists are increasingly discovering is that bird groups that have been classified based on bill shape don't hold up. And that, in fact, there could be two closely related birds with completely different looking bills. And so birds like tanagers and cardinals, so that those are both two groups of New World birds that are colorful. And we think of cardinals as having these sort of the big chunky bills like the grosbeak, and the tanagers have more narrow insect eating bills. And so they were grouped into completely separate groupings. But it turns out that's not it at all. And both the cardinal and the scarlet tanager, the northern cardinal and the scarlet tanager, are actually in the same family. They're both cardinals. And it's because it's not has to do with the bill. Actually, their feather color. It turns out that red color is a distinctive feature of that lineage of birds. So that any bird that has red feathers basically is likely in that same cardinal lineage. Okay, so bill shape. So just know, yes, it's useful in identifying a species, not necessarily for identifying a family of birds. Um, so here are four super colorful birds. No, no, we call these little brown jobs, right? So and they all, they're basically brown. And yet, when you look carefully, you will notice like a white crowned sparrow has that, gorgeous black and white on the top of its head. The golden crown has that sort of mushy yellowish. Sometimes it looks actually golden, but mostly it's just kind of yellowish. And then the California towhee has these wonderful peachy russet shades sort of mixed in with it, but less pattern. So it's important to look at not just what the color is, right? Does it have yellow on it, but where? And is it in a pattern? So we're looking at, the crown of the head, looking for that. You can see this on the song sparrow. There's that sort of dark dot right in the center of its chest. that's characteristic, and that sort of streakiness is very. So we have to look for patterns as well. Here's that black Phoebe. Um, and we had a close up of its bill before. This is a really common bird in our area, and I have them in my backyard. They're any place there's water nearby. There doesn't even have to be water there. It could just be nearby, and you'll have black Phoebes. And they have a very distinctive behavior, right? They're fly catchers, so they will perch and fly out to catch insects and fly back to the same perch, and they will do that repeatedly, and then they'll move to a different perch and do the same thing all over again. And you can see that behavior and know that you've got a black Phoebe, even if you can't see any details. Like it could be completely washed out in the sun. If you see that behavior, you know what you got. There's another bird, the spotted sandpiper. It's a freshwater sandpiper, so it's not generally found on in by the ocean, although sometimes along the bay. And they're sometimes called teeter tails because whenever they land after flying, they bob their tail up and down. And as they walk along, they bob their tail up and down. And so you look for that bobbing tail up or down. It doesn't matter that you can't see the spots. Well, you can't see the spots when they're here in the Bay Area because they only have spots in breeding plumage and they don't breed here. They breed north of here. So sometimes like just before here, we see them with their nice spotty breasts. But mostly, if you want to see a spotted sandpiper with spots, you got to go to Canada, Alaska, Maine, um, northern tier, maybe Washington State. There's some that breed there. Um, but those kind of behaviors are really, and then once you know what to look for, like as an example, another example, American robins, when they land, do the little tushy dance thing. And when you watch an American robin, when you see it, like then once you know that movement, like again, if you see it out of the corner of your eye and it lands and does that little thing, that little shake, you're like, oh, that's a robin. Even if I didn't see the identifying features, the behavior will give it away. Um, so using all these clues, so we've talked about shape and size and bill shape and color patterns, um, and behaviors. Like those are all sort of clues about what it is. But here's another clue. Like we know a lot about birds, and so we kind of know where they're supposed to be. And for the most part, they stay where they're supposed to be. And so if you are, you know, in, let's say, northern Florida, and you see a kind of all dark sparrow looking bird, with a yellowish bill, going through leaf litter on the ground. It's almost certainly going to be a fox sparrow and not a California towhee, right? I mean, they're just not that California towhees are found in California all year round. Fox sparrows, at least in the wintertime, are going to be there. So, so knowing something about that is important, which doesn't mean that birds don't break the rules because they do all the time. So we call a bird that shows up in a place where it's not supposed to be a vagrant, and that vagrancy is so it happens all the time, and in fact, it happens a lot in more and more lately, and we're not sure why that is. It could be because climate change is messing up their migratory patterns, and that's causing something crazy to happen. It could be because of light pollution. Birds, the birds have a mechanism for sensing magnetic fields, and it is the the mechanism is actually in their eyes, and it is activated by certain wavelengths of light. And so, if that gets messed with because of light pollution, that can also cause them to go off course. Um, so we don't know exactly. The other, we could be one of those things. It could also be that it's just that there are more people out looking for them, and that with more observers, you're more likely to see things, and we don't really know. Um, Habitat is another sort of aspect of, all right, so we're talking about range maps, about that sort of overall where they're found. But birds are also generally particular about what kind of habitat they prefer because they're pretty specialized for their what they eat. So if they're a shorebird that, eats, um, arthropods deep in the sand, like unlikely to be, in a savanna. They're going to be like on a mud flat or a sandy beach or a marsh. Um, so that really does is kind of a good indicator also. Like, is this the appropriate habitat for that bird? Again, birds do crazy things all the time. At the Christmas bird count this year, I was surveying at Lafayette Reservoir, and there was a red-necked phalarope, which a red-necked phalarope is a seabird. These are generally they swim and eat small fish and plankton, large plankton on the off the surface of the water, and they nest in the rocky cliffs of Alaska, and they winter off the coast of California. And in December, there was one swimming across the middle of the lake. You know, that happens. So, um, all right, now this one I have to do a little. My sound isn't working on the from directly from the computer, so I can't click on this. Here are two birds, the ruby-crowned kinglet and the Hutton's vireo. And if you just look at them, they are very, very similar. I can't tell you how many times I've seen one of these birds and like, which one is it? They're not even closely related, right? The kinglets and vireos are completely different families of birds. But let's listen to them. Here's the ruby-crowned kinglet. Play the song for you. There's that. Can you hear that?
No, I couldn't hear it this time.
Is it too high pitched there? Oh, it was working before.
I know.
Um, let's try a different call. Is that better?
No, I can't hear it now.
Huh. It was working before when we
I
tested this
know.
out. Oh no. All right. Well,
Mm-mm.
um, here's so the ruby crown kinglet, you'll have to look it up because it's worth hearing these two different sounds. So the ruby crown kinglet makes very kind of chirpy noises. It sounds very upbeat and happy. The Hutton's vireo makes this kind of raspy um, call that sounds like it's angry all the time. So if you listen for those sounds, I wonder if let me try and see if it actually works. Let's see if it works when I play it from my. Can you hear that?
No, but now we're all
Mm.
gonna go look it up
Oh my
because
goodness, I have to look it up. All About
yeah.
Birds, Merlin, those are all great places to hear bird songs. And I guess this was another one. This is actually in my front yard. Um, this is a Buick's Wren, and they have like dozens of different sounds that they make. And so I often get confused by them because they make lots of different sounds. And I can't, and I unfortunately I would share this one is it's actually a video, and it was making its scolding sound, it sounds a little bit like the Hutton's vireo, but um, and that's one of those things like, is that Hutton's vireo? Is that Buick's friend? But then it makes another sound, and you're like, oh, you know what it is. So
I
um,
actually think we can hear that one a little. Or I did hear something.
you heard something from me.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try again, see if I can. Um, I wonder if I've adjusted the audio. So when I was trying to get, let me just see if I adjust this.
Oh,
You heard that?
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
that's the Hutton's vireo. All right, so back up here. That's this guy on the right, the Hutton's vireo.
Mm.
And now we do oh, the ruby crown kinglet. Ruby crowned kinglet. And these are both super common birds around here.
Mm,
See, this sounds more like a bird to me, like less angry than, but similar. Um,
definitely.
all right, and now we go to the Buick's wren, which is this is I love this bird. It's like they're um, this is this guy. But when they finish with that call, they make this song. You can hear some mourning doves in the background. It's a really lovely, sweet singing song, but again, it's different. It's like two times in a row. It's not exactly the same, and they have a lot of variation in their singing, and but they will, and they're generally they hide too. So, so this one was like sitting right out on. This is a coyote bush. It's a variety called Mayakama Mound. So it's not the there's a Mound San Bruno as another one that's no, Pigeon Point is the other low growing one. And but this one's more tolerant of the inner, like I'm in Lafayette, so we get really hot summers here. This one does great. The more coastal low growing forms often don't do well here in the East Bay. All right. Oh, okay. So just to review, we looked at size, shape, color, patterns, behavior, range, and then listening for sounds. I'm just going to run it. So Merlin, that's what I was just using to share the sounds with you, but it has, so Merlin has these wonderful, so you open Merlin, you push that green button, and it will record everything that you're hearing. And if it's a bird song, doesn't recognize other things. But if it's a bird song or call, it will likely recognize it. And it's getting better and better all the time. When it first came out, it was like right 75% of the time. I would say it's right 80 to 90% of the time now. But you still have to kind of know what you would expect to see. So if something comes up as unusual, like out of range, it's like that's probably not what it is. And there are weird things like garbage trucks sometimes get called as, like a great egret. Again, think about, like, so if your phone is telling you that there was a great egret and you live, in the middle of a suburban subdivision far from the water, probably not a great egret. So those are all things to look for. So this is my sort of short list. So winter is really a fantastic time for birding in the Bay Area. There are, I would say, our peak abundance of individual birds. So, like, when do we have the most birds in the Bay Area is right about now, sort of from mid-December to late February. Because we get we talk about birds flying south for the winter. Well, we are south for many, many birds. So there are dozens of species that winter in the Bay Area often in large numbers, particularly on shoreline areas. So if you notice in the wintertime, almost all of the hot spots I've picked out are right along the shore. So they range from, I don't know if you can see when I point to one, but so from, I named them starting up here at Point Reyes, and so this sort of circled around. So the only one that's really an inland site that I put on here is Redwood Regional Park in Oakland, and I put that one on the map. Although you can see them elsewhere, I put it on the map because it is a great place for varied thrush, and I should have put a picture of varied thrush on in the presentation because it is. I talk about it all the time. It's a bird that's sometimes called the song of the redwood. It has a beautiful haunting thrush song. Thrushes are, so robins are a kind of thrush. We have robins, hermit thrushes, varied thrush. Those are our sort of three most common winter thrushes. And then in the spring and summer, we lose and we're down to just the robins, and then we get Swainson's thrush coming up. And they have beautiful haunting songs. Thrushes, all birds actually have that have syrinxes. Syrinx is the vocal cords of a bird, right? So in a mammal, our vocal cord is in the upper part of our throat before it branches into two for our lungs. For the syrinx is actually occurs in a bird after the branching. So there are actually two of them, one on each on the left side, one on the right side, and those two can actually harmonize. They can actually some birds are able to control them separately, which thrushes can do, and so thrushes can actually sing two notes at the same time and harmonize with themselves as they're singing their song. Fabulous stuff. Wait, what I have Merlin right out here in front of me. So why don't I share that varied thrush song and you can hear it for yourself. All right, this is the bird. It's absolutely gorgeous, and listen to it. Here we go. It starts with that strong, and then it has this whistling, rising. There it goes. Again, birds are particular. They make their own sounds. They don't follow the rules ever. But a beautiful bird. And so that's why I put that place on the list. It's like I always go there every winter. I go there to get my varied thrush for the year. Um, Places along the shoreline like Cesar Chavez Park, Arrowhead Marsh, Coyote Hills, Don Edwards, Balin's Preserve. These places along this side here are great for shorebirds and marsh birds. I was out at Arrowhead Marsh yesterday, and I had three different kinds of rails. I had Ridgway's rail, Virginia rail, and the Sora, which is another kind of rail, and a coot. Lots of coots. Coots are rails. And but also this time of year in the winter, we get wintering burrowing owls. And burrowing owls are about as cute a bird as you could have. So if you haven't seen one, Cesar Chavez Park, there are two at Arrowhead Marsh. It's ironically right in there's a sign saying wildlife protection area. Um, uh, this is where there are burrowing owls. Keep out, kind of don't release your cats here, all that kind of stuff. And that's right where it was, like right behind the sign. There it was, which was great. Um, Coyote Hills, great for just about. It's like probably the best birding destination in the Bay Area. Um, Heron's Head in San Francisco has fantastic shorebirds. It's like this wonderful hidden gem of a wetland. And these are a lot of the Heron's Head Park, Arrowhead Marsh. These are places where Golden Gate Bird Alliance works to do habitat restoration. We at Actually, my first day on the job, I went to Heron's Head Park with our volunteer group, and we were removing this invasive plant that was taking over the marshes, and so it was kind of a great way to start the job, I thought. Um, all right, so I just want to tell you a little bit more about the organization. So if you aren't a member, I would encourage you to join. It's $25 student senior, $35 for adults. You don't have to be a member to participate in any of the things we do, but your membership helps support the cost of running those programs. So we hope you will become a member if you participate. We run this year. Last year, since you're just starting. Last year we ran over 350 free field trips. That's almost one a day. So many of them have limited capacity and they often fill up. But if you sign up for our newsletter or e-newsletter, you get an advance notice. They open at 1 o'clock on the third Wednesday of the month. for the next month, and that's a great way to go out with an experienced leader or not. If you're brand new to birds, we have a series of programs that we call Bird Curious that are just intended to be easy entry, so that if you haven't done a lot of bird watching, if you don't know how to use binoculars, those are great places to learn. Um, we have a monthly speaker series. It's usually the third Thursday. What's coming up on the next one is, I think, is the 19th of February. It's actually one of the scientists behind Merlin is going to be talking about how Merlin works. So it should be a really fascinating program. They're often on Zoom. If we can do both in person and Zoom, we do that. If we Sometimes they're only on Zoom, sometimes they're only in person, but we do our best to do both. We have habitat restoration. You can see some folks here cleaning up trash at, this is actually, it looks like it's Arrowhead Marsh. Yeah, that's Arrowhead Marsh. We run youth education programs in San Francisco, Richmond, and Oakland schools, Title I schools. Really, we take kids out to um, salt marshes and to the beach. Some of who have never been to a beach before in their life. It's shocking to me that in this day and age that there are people who just don't leave their neighborhoods, and so we help that happen. Um, and then, of course, on conservation issues, we work to establish the bird safe building ordinances in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, Richmond. Did I say Richmond twice? And and those were among the first in the country. The San Francisco was the very first bird safe building ordinance, and we're right now working to try and strengthen it so that it's uh, a stronger ordinance than it's been. All right, I'm just going to touch briefly on some conservation, and then we can take some questions. Um, so obviously, bird populations are not doing well. So this red line, that's our bird populations, change in billions. So since 1970, we have lost 3 billion birds with a B. That is a lot. It's basically about a third of the population is gone. And birders notice it, that they were just not seeing as many birds. Some groups of birds are declining more than others. Freshwater waterfowl, the kinds of ducks that duck hunters hunt, are doing great. Their populations have rebounded. They're doing fine. Whereas in contrast, almost every other group of birds is doing poorly, with grassland birds and shorebirds the worst. Um, and the biggest driver of this, of course, is habitat loss, which is pretty major. So anytime we convert wildlands into farms or homes or factories or parking lots, we are, removing habitat. Um, Cats are the biggest threat after habitat loss. We're talking 3 billion a year. That's basically, like, cats could be single-handedly responsible for the loss of birds, but we know it's more complicated than that. Right, remember, bird populations go up and down over the course of a year because every year they're more offspring. So in the fall, the bird population is often 3 times higher than it is in the spring, because most birds don't make it through their first year, which is probably okay, because if you think about it, a robin can lay 6 to 8 eggs, and they can have 2 clutches a year, sometimes 3. So, like, we would be up to our eyeballs in robins if every single one of them survived. So it's okay, and they are food for other creatures, and that's part of their role. Collisions with buildings and glass, including homes. I actually think this number is low. We for this slide we use the lower end of this. Recent research suggests it's probably closer to 1 billion a year in North America. So, cars turn out to be another big killer of birds. I didn't realize this until I started doing this work. Um, incidental poisoning from rat poisons and other kinds of neonicotinoid pesticides or contribute significantly. And then we get to all the other weird stuff, including wind farms. Wind farms are, they're not great, but compared to these other things, they're not so terrible. And we've learned a lot. Unfortunately for us in the Bay Area, one of the very first wind farms in the country was in the Altamont. And we now know if we were starting that project today, we would have to do an environmental impact report that would show that there are too many golden eagles in that area and they would never be able to get a permit. But back when I was a kid, when they were building that, no one knew that we had to worry about windmills and birds. And so we didn't even, no one was even thinking about it. All right. We've got 10 minutes for questions, so it's kind of perfect.
Wow, thank you. This is great. I'm it's making me really want to. I was telling Glenn the other day, I've lived in this house for 20 years, and the other day I opened my door to let my dog out, and then I kind of went back and half shut it, and then I turned back around and I opened it back up because I heard this whole orchestra of birds, and I was suddenly like, has this always been here and I haven't noticed it? And all of this is just making me really want to do a lot more observation and sort of cataloging of what's going on in my garden, and trying to see, different plants and whatnot that could influence, help make them happier, I guess.
So
Um,
I have several presentations on plants for birds. So we'll have to have me back,
oh, cool.
and I'd be very happy to share some of that too. The uh, what was it? I had a point, but now I don't remember what I was going to say. But just that there really is a lot that we can do in our backyards. I mean,
Mm.
I have to say that I don't feed birds directly. Like I don't put out bird seed. I don't put a hummingbird feeder out. But I have a ton of birds in my yard, and because I feed them with the plants that I choose, and they're primarily natives, not entirely, because I started as a plant ecologist before I got into birds. I worked at the New York Botanical Garden and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, so I've got a lot of I'm a gardener first before I'm a birder, and so I like the Proteaceae, so I've got my proteas and Banksias and all that in the garden. I've got a lot. I love aloes, so I have a ton of aloes. I'm careful to try to choose when I choose something that's not native. Careful to choose something that's not invasive because I don't want the plants getting out of my yard and into neighbors or into the wildlands around us. But you know, it's not clear to me exactly what works best in California. In the East, where most of the research has been done, it suggests that about 70% native plants is what you need to provide adequate food for wildlife. And it's funny because you would think, well, that I get that native plants might have more diversity of caterpillars, but the birds don't really care what kind of a caterpillar they're eating. They just want a caterpillar. They don't care. They don't care what it is. And I certainly know, like I've raised tomatoes. Like I know there are caterpillars on my tomatoes. There's a lot of not native things that have plenty of insect pests on them. Um, but it turns out that it actually has more to do with that the diversity matters because the timing is different. So with non-native plants, even though they might have the same mass of caterpillars over the year, they tend to have fewer species, and that means that the species tend to be on their own schedule. So each individual species of caterpillar has its own cycle when they emerge from the egg, when their caterpillars, you know, grow, and how long it takes them to mature, how long they pupate, and when do they emerge as adults. Like that cycle is different for every species. And so you end up having more spread out over a longer period, and that's really what matters for birds and feeding their young. They could, having a glut of cabbage white caterpillars, on day one doesn't really help, raise a brood of babies because they're not going to be there for the whole life cycle. So
I'm
it
glad you
doesn't.
brought up, yeah, I'm glad you brought up caterpillars because from our point of view, what we see a lot of times in the nursery is that people will come in with caterpillar damage and want to do something to get rid of the caterpillars. And the thing is you just have to remember that they're a primary source of food for birds, and it's kind of like the start of like the whole
Yeah.
ecosystem in several ways. And so, just on a basic level in the garden, getting familiar with that, that everything's a food for something. And really, if you start eliminating any one thing, the balance starts,
Gets off. It's so, and you
gets
need,
off.
yeah.
Yeah.
So avoiding pesticide use is I think that like the number one thing you can do in your garden. And I would sort of recommend, like, even before you start thinking about what you're planting, think about how you're managing what you're planting, because that really does matter, And I can tell you, I mean, I have a busy full-time job and two kids and aging parents, and I don't have as much time for my garden as I wish I had. And so I have gardeners because I need them because I couldn't keep up with it on my own. And one of the battles I fight with, I won the battle about no pesticides. Like they got that, no pesticides, no herbicides. They I won that battle. That was easy. The one I'm struggling with is leaving the leaves, right?
Mm.
Because those caterpillars, right? They what tends to happen with caterpillars is they're as part of their life cycle, right? They hatch as from eggs. They eat on whatever plants they're eating on. And then they start to form a pupa or a chrysalis, depending on whether it's a moth or a butterfly. And for the most part, they do that in the leaf litter overwinter. Like that's their overwinter strategy for a lot of moths and butterflies is overwinter as a pupa and then emerge when the conditions are right in the spring. They emerge, they mate, they lay eggs, they start the whole process over again. And um, and if you don't have leaf litter, then there's no place for those pupa to be in the winter time except on the surface of your mulch,
Hmm.
and that just makes them more exposed to weather and predators. And so you want them to be able to survive. I mean, I'm very happy that my towhees and sparrows are eating a lot of those, and Buick's wrens are eating a lot of those caterpillars, so that my garden isn't overwhelmed by them. But um, but they need to be enough to survive so that there's more food for next year. And so that's my battle, getting my gardeners to not blow every leaf. I've said like only blow the leaves from hardscape, and they can't quite seem to get that through their heads yet. But I'm working on it.
Well, so if we were gonna just like some main takeaways, if we're gonna try to support the bird community in our garden would be to avoid spraying, especially the neonicotinoids, just looking for that. There's
Yeah.
neonicotinoid free plants and they're labeled. Sloat is actually very dedicated to this. And a lot of our growers are neonicotinoid free. It's a big word. Look it up. It's
Yeah.
super important to know. Um, and then also leave the leaves. That's kind of like you know, a thing. Would you also, what about like having a water source, having a bird bath? People are also making those. I've been seeing on like Instagram, people are making those like, um, what do you want to like? It's like a kind of like a ball or a cage of like cat hair or like dryer lint and stuff like that that they can make nests out of. I mean, is there like things like that that we can do
So
in addition?
I mean, so I would so starting with like again, no spray. That's the top of the list. Cats indoors. That's a really it's a really good because you're going to be drawing birds to your backyard and then just feeding them to your cat. Like maybe not. And even a well-fed cat will kill birds. So the um, as planting natives, I think is pretty important, and like, it doesn't have to be 100%. You can still love your, exotic plants that you collect. But particularly thinking about what we would call keystone species. So there are some species in any area that have an outsized influence on the environment that they're in. And in our area, that's oak trees, willow trees, manzanita, ceanothus, grasses, all of our native grasses. Like those, they have a huge impact compared to how many of them there are. So one oak tree in your yard, it does more good than just about everything else in your yard combined, right? But when you have that oak tree, protecting it is important. Um, I have to say that when I bought this house, there was an oak there was a bunch of weed trees that had just sprung up because the previous two owners hadn't maintained the yard very well. And so I was having my landscapers remove the things that shouldn't be there or were too close to the house, or there were a number of things. And they were like, "Oh, well, that oak tree, there's a valley oak behind my vegetable patch." They're like, "Oh, we should take this one out. It's shading your vegetables." Like, over my dead body will you take that tree out? That's the only tree. Like, you could take every other tree out from my yard, and
Hmm.
the birds would not care very much. But that one, they would care about. So planting a natives, where you can is really critical. I think treating your windows for collisions it's a big problem. A billion birds a year, and it's not difficult to do. It's not particularly expensive. The American Bird Conservancy has a great section of its website dedicated to the solutions. And our website is a little behind, but we just had a volunteer who started as our bird safe buildings coordinator, and she's working 2 days a week for free to help us build this program out. And I'm super excited because it's a program I've started in New York years ago. So I'm excited that we're going to have more presence in this field too. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we can do, and it's um, I have whole programs. This was more about an introduction to bird watching and where and how to do it. And I strongly encourage you to, if you haven't been out on a birding trip, do sign up for one of our field trips. The ones that tend to have more space in them are ones like we do at the San Francisco Botanical Garden once a month. We do a trip at Lake Merritt once a month. We do a trip at Hillside Park in Richmond once a month, and those tend to have a bigger group because they're more open spaces where we can handle bigger crowds. And so those are great ones to start with or look for our Bird Curious programs on our website, goldengatebirdalliance.org. And I hope to meet you out in the field sometime. It is These are critically important for the health of our environment, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you'll join me.